Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Lead with Giants TV. Our guest this evening is Chris Edmonds. He is the author of The Culture Engine. Received the book the other day. It's a fabulous read. Chris, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Absolutely. Happy to appreciate the invitation.
Excellent. And my co-host is Liz Stella. She's out there in Salt Lake. How are you today?
I'm great, Cal. Happy to be here.
Great. Chris, where are you from? Where are you located right now? Where are you hanging out from?
Right now, I'm outside of Denver, Colorado, in a little town called Conifer. So we're at 8,500 feet. We're in the mountains. So right now, it's not raining and not thundering, which is unusual. This is our monsoon season. So I thought we'd have some interesting background noise, but we don't. So we'll see how long that lasts.
Good, and it was nice to meet your dog earlier. He was just kind of hanging out there, but good. So great. Well, thank you again for being with us, and let me do a quick introduction about the author. Chris Edmonds is a sought-out-after speaker, author, executive consultant. He opened his consulting firm in 1990, has been with the Ken Blanchard Company since 1995. Chris is the co-author of Blanchard's best-selling book, Leading at a Higher Level, and co-author of the company's proven award-winning culture change process. The new book, The Culture Engine, will be published in September, and the Culture Engine shows leaders how to create a high-performing, values-aligned cultures through the creation of an organizational constitution. Chris, talk to us about, define for our audience, what is organizational constitution?
Great question. It's really the core big idea of the Culture Engine book. And an organizational constitution is a formal statement of the team or the department or the division or the companies. It'll work in all kinds of contexts in organizations. But let's kind of talk about team. That's a little bit easier. So there's four elements. So it talks about the team's purpose, their reason for being today. It talks about values and behaviors, and we can talk about behaviors in a little bit, but values are about, kind of what a good citizen looks like, acts like, sounds like on the team day to day. And it includes strategies and then goals. So we kind of cover the performance expectations piece and accountability, and we cover the values expectations piece and accountability with this document.
And how important those are. So I know you really spend a good time on purpose and values, and they're really important, and people, I guess sometimes they just kind of put it on the back shelf. They get it going in the beginning and they write it down. They get everybody together one day on a kind of a manager's retreat or so forth, and then they just kind of leave that behind, and they think it's going to be a process of osmosis, if you will. It's going to talk to us about that, and why do we miss that so much through the gates? We let it just flow.
It's a great question, and I think it's a Western influence. I think there's certainly an American influence because we're taught as leaders to focus on performance, and performance is what gets measured. Metrics of performance in all sizes, shapes, colors. We've got dashboards with all kinds of performance metrics, and so we have leaders that's all they know, and that's all the role models they've had, and if they've had great bosses that really looked at values and were very intentional about values and team citizenship, it's a very small percentage. And so what commonly gets measured, monitored, and rewarded is results. And so it can be, again, a bunch of people in a conference room, and they do this wonderful document, and they get posters, and they get maybe the backs of business cards, carry these themes of these are our values, and this is what we're going to live by. But the reality is the stuff that gets reinforced day to day is not necessarily the values. It's a little bit tougher. It's a little bit vaguer. It's like we don't know how to do that. Performance metrics are much more black and white, so I'm going to hang over here. And so the biggest problem we face is that we can end up without formal values. We can end up with people not behaving very well. And they can basically, if they're incented individually, they can behave in ways that suit themselves and screw their buddies, right? Kind of
Right.
inhibit others' success. And there's no consequence for that. In fact, I might even, win a trip to the Bahamas, if I get, a certain project or so done, despite the fact that there's body bags piled all around me,
Right.
as I've kind of accomplish that. So what we're trying to get to is values are not only important, as you say, but they're actually very easy to manage if you get them into behavioral terms, observable terms.
That's excellent. I want to come back to that, but have Liz jump into the conversation as well.
Chris, just quickly, in developing this Constitution, who do you suggest participates in the creation? Do you think employees should be engaged in the process as well as management?
Great question. And what we found is that senior leaders are the ones that really have the ability, they have the responsibility, they even have the authority to actually revise the culture. And that's what we're doing. Every organization has a culture. It may not be a culture that's really very perfect, but it exists. There is a culture that exists. And so what we have to do is have senior leadership involvement and even championing of the culture change. But what you describe is very important, because what we want is a democratic kind of approach to sharing the elements of the Constitution. So basically we want to have the senior leaders start to craft some new rules. That's what the values and behaviors are. They're going to be equally important, equally measurable as performance metrics, and you want to have the accountability occur, but there's the involvement, that democratic process of socializing those behaviors, socializing the values, so that employees get a chance to say, yep, I can sign up for that, or what in God's name are you thinking, or I think this is a behavior that would fit into the integrity value that you're describing, and I think you're missing one. And so there's a very interesting responsibility for senior leaders to craft it, to draft it, to then socialize it and share it, to invite feedback from all employees, and then they, as leaders, they kind of have to pull the trigger. So again, in a team environment, it's a smaller scope typically. So maybe you've got 10, 12 team members. The leader of that team can craft what they believe to be value behaviors that make sense for the values that the team wants. And then let the employees respond. Let them provide some insight, some feedback. Employees certainly don't have a lot of experience with values and behaviors either. So a lot of time they're going to go, yeah, that sounds fine with me. They don't know exactly what they're signing up for. They don't know what it's going to look like. But it's vitally important that they have early opportunity to provide some perceptions, to provide some suggestions, but it's ultimately up to the leaders to actually say, these are the new rules.
Chris, I want to go back to the performance management factor of it is, you have people who, well, how do you measure culture? How do you measure those intangibles? I guess that's a better way to say it. So how would you respond to that?
Well, it's exactly the question that we had when we began doing this work, and we had senior leaders say, how do you know my culture is broken, or how do you know my culture is bent?
Right.
And so we would commonly go in and do interviews of the leadership team, of next level reports, and we'd come back with a document that basically says, here's what you're doing well, here's what you're not doing so well. And not surprisingly, in many cases, the holes are about trust and about respect and about dignity. And so, and it's leaders behaving badly, and it's employees behaving badly. It's kind of a free-for-all. It's a bit of the Wild West. And the reality is that if that's all leaders have been focused upon, you're going to get kind of what you get. So if we convince leaders that culture is something that's actually inhibiting performance and inhibiting good service to customers internally and externally, then they might be willing to say, then tell me how you measure it. Tell me how I can see what my market share is. I can see how many widgets we've sold this month. I can see how many customers actually, start to buy something on our shopping cart online, and only 3% or 10% or whatever in the last hour have abandoned those carts. There's all kinds of interesting metrics from a performance standpoint that they look at. And the avenue I go to is, so values are important. Would you say integrity is important? Would you say justice, fairness is important? And of course, everybody nods their heads. And I'm not inventing them. I'm actually taking them from documents that they've given me. They may have had some misguided effort earlier of creating values, but not done any alignment to them. And I said, good, then let's get behaviors that if and when people are modeling these behaviors, then they're modeling the values you want. So let's not assume people are going to naturally, through osmosis, know exactly how to behave. Let's tell them how to behave. And once you get these behaviors defined, you can actually do surveys and say, to what degree did Chris keep his promises this month or this last 6 months? If keeping promises is part of your integrity value, people can actually rate the degree to which I am keeping my promises day in and day out. And it has nothing to do with my attitude. It has nothing to do with my commitment to the organization. But it begins to put black and white, measurable and tangible behaviors so that you can actually take this kind of vague concept of culture and make it real and make it measurable.
So it sounds like, we have a framework to follow, the framework of citizenship, and then we have, what I'm hearing you saying is that whatever the behavior is, and I think you mentioned that too as well in the book, whatever we're reinforcing, whether good or bad, it's going to impact their results, right?
Oh boy, it really does. And it's so interesting because there's such a drive for performance, such a drive for performance metrics. But what we found with the clients that have engaged in our culture process and basically putting an organizational constitution into place, and by the way, it puts a pretty strong demand on leaders. They're going to put themselves under some scrutiny. If they propose this, they're going to have to live this very consistently, and the scrutiny is not fun. But if it's the right thing to do, if it makes sense for the team, what's been very, very clear is we typically get 40% gains in employee engagement and employee connection. We get 40% gains in customer service reactions, ratings, the customer experience. And lastly, a 30 to 35% boost in profits in 18 to 24 months. Mm-hmm. And you present those kinds of results to leaders, they're very interested.
Yes, you're right. And we'll hit the segment 2. It's going to be more about action steps that leaders can take to really influence their culture. So we'll do that on segment 2. I want to give Liz kind of a closing question before we end up segment 1 here.
Great.
Just quickly, Chris. So you talk about understanding your organization's truth, and I assume this is the first step, before you start constructing the Constitution. Can you just briefly touch on that topic?
Absolutely. What's interesting is many leaders are insulated a bit. Sometimes the information they get is filtered. Sometimes it's driven by different agendas. Again, there's politics in any organization where there's 2 or more people. So, of course, there's politics in marriages, and there's politics in small businesses and in large businesses. But the idea is you really can't understand what's working and what's not working if all you look at is performance. So by engaging in conversations, engaging in wandering around, engaging in formal assessments that will basically give, I call it, undeniable truth about the way the organization actually operates today, it increases leaders' commitment to actually refining the culture, and it increases their commitment to, they're going to have to, again, do some behavioral changes themselves. And if they don't have that kind of mindset of, boy, we need to do some shifting, we need to do some changing, they're not going to really take this 2-year process and longer to heart. So they've got to learn exactly how it's operating today, and sometimes that truth hurts, but they got to sense it out.
Well, fabulous discussion. We are here on the segment 1, ending the discussion. Thank you so much, Chris, and the audience can view this the recording as well. But wonderful segue for us, and we will hit more actionable items on segment 2. So you'll have an opportunity to view that as well. All right, let's finish up here.